How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another edition of Athletes Hub podcast. Just me today. Just wanted to do a quick video actually on the back of the Manchester United win over Spurs on Saturday, and just talk a bit about Michael Carrick. There's been a lot of chat about him potentially becoming a serious candidate for the Manchester United head coach job on a permanent basis once his time as interim manager ends. And I just want to kind of talk about just sort of, I guess, what he's done so far and whether it's still a big risk, to be honest with you. But I think just looking at the 4 games so far, 4 wins out of 4, and really impressive. I spoke about with Flexx on the weekly roundups. What he's done is he's really kind of simplified everything. There's talk about the players enjoying training again. He knows what sessions to put on, and just little things like the positioning on the football pitch, playing players in the right positions. It just seems as if there's a real, I guess, feel-good factor about everything that he's done at the football club so far. And I guess you look at, when he took over, because I think it's, as much as Michael Carrick is a serious candidate to become permanent head coach, you've also got to look at it from the perspective of, when he took over, when Darren Fletcher was in charge, it was a 2-2 draw against Burnley under Fletcher, and obviously lost to Brighton at home in the FA Cup. And after that FA Cup defeat, the season was pretty much done in terms of going for trophies. There was no more Carabao Cup, there was no FA Cup, obviously not in Europe. And I guess United's real trophy at that point was just to kind of fight for the top 4. So we look at it from that perspective. Carrick came in there, and the only way was up. There was nothing to fight for really. The top 4 became the trophy, it became the real aim for United the rest of the season. And you couldn't really get any worse or any low than where United were when Carrick first came in. So again, it's 1 game a week, to be honest with you. There's a lot of time in between games to prepare. You look at the last couple of games, the team hasn't changed that much. I believe if Dorgu was still fit, following the Arsenal game, I don't think he would have changed it against Fulham and obviously against Tottenham. He's kind of kept everything the same, simple. Everyone knows what they're doing. There's a real rhythm in the team now as well, particularly attacking-wise. So in a way, it's almost become a real blessing. Everyone's fit again, apart from Dorgu, obviously. But it's almost been a bit of a blessing for Michael Carrick. There's not been a lot to change. There's not been a lot to tinker with, to be fair. In that way, match rhythm is in full flow. Players know what to do out on the pitch. And a manager's job is quite easy. Of course, players on the bench like Shesko want to come on Mason Mount to make a difference. But from a manager's perspective, though, you don't want to change it too much. You don't want to tinker too much. And he hasn't got to, because again, it's 1 game a week. But I think a big part of it as well is having the likes of Casemiro in the team. And it's weird because it feels like Casemiro now we're losing him when he's really becoming great again, that he's really getting to his own. Him and Mainu, last 4 games have been sensational, to be honest. And it kind of, as much as you speak about Ruben Amorim and wanting managers to do well, supporting them, it makes him look kind of silly for the way that Mainu was handled, because Mainu's come in the team and he's been flawless, really. Him and Casemiro as a partnership have been fantastic. There's been a lot of, speculation and talk about, Casemiro, as Jamie Carragher famously said, leave football before the football leaves you. But Casemiro's been fantastic. And it's not always about the legs. It's about his in-game intelligence, where to be positioning. There's so many times you watch Casemiro and he's making a defensive block, and then 2 minutes later, he's in the other end, almost scoring a goal. Like, he just knows where to be at the right time. And I think me mentioning Casemiro and him leaving in the summer is because, as much as we've spoken about Michael Carrick, and we've spoken about, him, again, potentially getting a head coach's job, you've got to remember that right now, everything is simple for Michael Carrick. There's only 1 game a week. There's a lot of preparation time. I know upcoming is West Ham away, and that's, a bit of a short turnaround. But the majority of games that Carrick has said has always had a week to prepare. But if you're then to give Michael Carrick the job, let's just say Man United get in the top 4, they're playing Champions League football next season, and Carrick is the permanent head coach. You've now got a situation where, and don't forget, it's the World Cup year as well. So you might have players coming back late from international duty. God forbid there's injuries to deal with as well. And then you've also got to think about the signings that United make in the summer. Because if you're losing Casemiro, you've got to bring in a real top player to replace him. So you bring in Michael Carrick, we're in September. You've got a Champions League now. You've got their Carabao Cup, and then obviously you've got the FA Cup that starts in January. No, that's a different proposition for Michael Carrick. And yes, at Middlesbrough, he managed a lot of games. They play a lot of games in the Championship, but the caliber of opponent is different. Essentially, even if you're Middlesbrough manager, you're playing essentially the teams in the same league, you might get maybe a different opponent in the Carabao Cup. But in September, United, you're then having to rotate your squad manage your squad for Premier League games, for Carabao Cup competitions, and then also in the Champions League. Now, that's a very different proposition to managing a team that plays only one game a week, really, to be honest. And that's where we're going to see, can his managerial nous, can you really take on that challenge? And can you really, the likes of, again, the big managers, look at the likes of Emery, who, even Eddie Howe, they've managed to get Newcastle and Aston Villa into the Champions League respectively, and they've been able to kind of somewhat cope with that schedule. They struggled at times, but they're both top managers. But again, Aston Villa and Newcastle are very different clubs to Man United, respectively, in terms of expectation and winning trophies on a regular basis. But that's almost like the question mark I've got. Yes, Michael Carrick is doing great right now, but everything is simple. He's not having to change a team. He's got a lot of preparation time. He's obviously got a lot of good staff around him, and that was a big talking point with the likes of Tom Holland coming in, Jonathan Woodgate, and obviously Johnny Evans being appointed. But when you get to the point next season where you potentially got latecomers from the World Cup, maybe injuries, you've then got to, rebuild the squad in a way, get some signings in, top signings to replace certain players, and you've then got to manage your squad when it comes to major competitions. Can he really deal with that? I might be wrong. Maybe he can deal with it. But I mentioned before, Ineos, and Sir Jim Ratcliffe, they've got a lot to think about, because I don't think they can afford, too many bad appointments. I think you look at when they first took over in 2024, I think the way they handled Erik ten Hag wasn't great. He probably should have left after the FA Cup final. He got given a new contract. They sacked him. Dan Ashworth was hired and fired within months of his appointment. And then Amorim was pretty much a disaster from start to finish. So I don't think Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos really can afford to make a bad decision. Of course, the fans are going to say, well, if he wins every game now, from now to the end of the season, it gets United into second potentially, which is a real possibility if City and Villa aren't consistent enough. Then there's no way you can't give Carrick the job. But at the same time, if that appointment was to go wrong, right, that's on Ineos. And a lot of fans will probably turn around and say, well, yeah, he's done really, really well, but you shouldn't have given him the job because he hasn't got a lot of experience. But that's the tricky situation or scenario that the club find himself in now. And I said to Flexx after the Arsenal result, I said that the club needs to be very, very careful who they appoint as the next permanent head coach, because I don't think Ineos can afford to have too many, bad. I don't think they can afford another bad appointment, to be fair. But listen, I love Michael Carrick. He was a club legend. He's been part of my favourite ever memories as a United fan. I think between 2006 to 2009, for me, were the best ever years. I went to his testimonial in 2017. I was there. It was a great occasion. He's a legend, and I would not want to see another club legend. I guess I wouldn't want to see it end in a disastrous manner that we've seen many managers at United have since Ferguson retired. Because Moyes obviously didn't go as planned. Van Gaal was sacked probably on the day or day after winning the FA Cup. Mourinho left, after defeat to Liverpool back in 2018, wasn't great. Solskjaer, club legend, started off quite well, but then the wheels fell off at the end, and he gave that famous interview when he got upset, and you don't want to see him leave in that manner. Ten Hag won the FA Cup, and maybe you could have said should have been sacked then, and maybe he could have had his head high a bit. Got given a new contract, and he left, after a defeat to West Ham as well. And now Amorim has left, with a disaster. Just been a disaster, really, from start to finish for Amorim. So I wouldn't want to see Carrick go down that route. And I think that's what we have to kind of think about. If the club go for an experienced manager and it goes wrong, then at least they've made that secure appointment, and it's up to that man to then work his magic and make things happen. But if Carrick was to be given an opportunity, and again, if he's given the job, then I'll support him 100%. Again, he's a legend, brilliant player. And you probably look at his demeanour and think, well, Carrick is probably the perfect candidate in a way, because he's very, very calm. He's not erratic on the touchline. His demeanour doesn't change much in press conferences, in post-match interviews. He's always the same, always calm. And maybe that's what the club need. Maybe they need someone like that. They've had managers before who are quite dramatic, quite, the press conferences are a bit of like a spectacle. But Carrick is just level-headed the whole way through. So maybe he's the candidate that the club need. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to see a club legend, right, go down the same route other managers have gone down. And the only worry and the only risk, again, is when it comes down to the nitty-gritty next season, you're the man in charge now, and expectation. Because let's face it, United are expected to win trophies. They're not expected to just get in top four and compete in competitions. The very least is to compete. The expectation is to win, and the very least is to compete. So, he's got to remember that. And again, Middlesbrough did a great job. I think he left Middlesbrough when he was third in the playoff positions. But again, Middlesbrough and United is two different animals. And again, I might be wrong. Maybe he can deal with it. But I'm just thinking, right now, he couldn't have done any worse, than when he took over. The club was at an all-time low, out of the FA Cup, nothing to play for. The only way was up. But now, potentially getting in the top four next season, can he really show that managerial quality and manage the squad, manage the pressures of playing in the Champions League as a coach, as a playing the Premier League, cup competitions, and again, it depends on signings as well. The club have got to get the signings correct, because if Casemiro is going to go, which it looks like he's going to go, confirmed he's leaving, right, there needs to be another top replacement in there. Mainly's been fantastic, but I do believe we need to get another central mid player beside him. I think that's how you get the best out of Kobbie Mainoo, or potentially in a free. So these are all things the club have got to think about, And there's still players there who are under contract after a long time. Luke Shaw, Dalot, there's still question marks over him. There's a lot of things to think about the football club, and this becomes Carrick's problem going forward. Now, it's not just about now he's a position now, but just keeping people happy now, keeping the feel-good factor. Next season, it's business time, and expectation is going to be, again, it's going to be high, it's going to be relentless. So my only question is, can you really deal with that going forward? Whereas if you also get a Thomas Tuchel in there potentially, or maybe a Unai Emery, or even a Pochettino, those managers have been there and they've done it, so they could be maybe a safer option. But again, if Carrick was to be given the chance, could he really kind of deal with that pressure? It remains to be seen. So far, he's dealing with it well. 4 wins out of 4. Hopefully, ahead of West Ham, could win that game as well. But again, if Carrick was going to drop, I'll support him 100%. I love Michael Carrick. Great player, contributed lots to the football club. As a footballer, and obviously under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer when he was there, was a coach for Mourinho as well. So he's been there, and he's been around the pressure points in football, right? He's learned off the best managers as a player, and also working as a coach. So there's no reason why he couldn't do a good job. But I still feel like there's an element of risk in there, just because we haven't seen him as a permanent head coach in that pressure situation where you're managing 4 competitions, you're at United, you're not at Middlesbrough anymore. So that's just probably a question mark for me. But listen, if he doesn't get this job, I think what he's shown so far is he's very capable of managing another Premier League team. There'll be clubs out there, in the summer who are probably looking at changing managers, and Carrick would be a top contender at United or somewhere else. So, it remains to be seen. But I don't know what you guys think. I think there's a lot of feel good around United right now. A lot of fans will be saying, "Yeah, give him the job." But the club have got to think about it from a different perspective, because again, I don't think they can afford another bad appointment. There's millions of pounds to be paid off if it doesn't go well. So those are things that they've got to think about. But yes, it's a tricky one, man. It's a tricky one. I don't know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments down below, guys. Again, we're on TikTok, so I put all the details and the handles in the description as well. We're on Instagram. Like and subscribe on YouTube. We appreciate all your support. We're also on X as well, so follow us on there. And I will see you guys in the next one.